Something. Something again. All right. I can't hear anything, so hopefully you can hear me. Thanks to Pam and all of you for letting me join your group this evening. Apologies for the delay. My clock on my laptop keeps getting out of sync. I had a couple of issues getting this up. I'm assuming also that you can see the slides okay, so I'll leave it to Pam to text me if that's not the case. Bit weird to not do interactive, but what the heck is a ham radio anyway? Some of you have probably already heard of this and heard it referred to as amateur radio as well. Back in the days before the internet, but after smoke signals and telegraph wires and everything like that. This is a super broad hobby. This is going to be pretty high level overview. We'll cover quite a few things, but I know that there's some things that were on my original list that aren't in this today. So there'll be a question and answer session at the end as well. And you're of course always happy to get a hold of me later. So radio kind of started off with some spark gap transmitters and stuff. They found out that when you made sparks, it actually threw a blast of radio frequency over all kinds of different frequencies, and they started sending things with that, with pretty crude antennas and things like that at first maybe, and then going from there. And it's evolved since then, you know, encoding audio and things with amplitude modulation, frequency modulation, going on to single sideband, and eventually a bunch of digital modes as well, which I'm sure a lot of you have been familiar with SDR. Apologies for this guy not looking so happy. I just wanted to show a spark gap thing in use. It's actually a bit more exciting than this, I think. Radio's been traditionally a hobby of hackers. I think one of the first uses of the word hacker referring to a person was in radio, people hacking together homebrew radios and things like this one. And it's all about experimentation and hacking things together, and it's ridiculously broad hobby with all kinds of things to learn. It bleeds across into a lot of different areas. I think that it's still quite relevant, and you go to even a hacker conference or a security conference or anything like that, or you talk to other people that you know and have common hobbies and interests with, you know, a lot of it bleeds over into amateur radio and vice versa. One of those things is, you know, electronics. If you've ever been, you know, soldering on a project or anything like that, maybe a kit or a homebrew thing for a guitar amplifier or pedal, effects pedal or anything like that. If you're doing some soldering, circuit design, you can design some radio components and things like that. Go a bit further, people who've been involved with Arduino and Raspberry Pis, now we're talking microcontrollers and PIC controllers and programming those sort of things, to do things from tuning, automatically tuning a magnetic loop antenna like the one shown here, to doing some data relay or some packet encoding and things like that. Antenna design, another part of this hobby. So designing, improving a wide range of different types of antennas. If you were at a Sydney security conference last month, actually I think there are a couple guys in your group, this antenna on the left will look really familiar. And just going with all kinds of homebrew antennas you can make yourself quite easily, improving on the design, tweaking them, adjusting them, improving them. There have been so many different antenna designs, it can get a bit carried away. Also fox hunts. Not these guys though, talking about radio direction finding. So a number of years ago, I used to go out at least once a month probably on a Saturday, and go looking for transmitter beacons. And you don't have to have a fancy thing like the one shown on the right. You could just make something out of PVC and an old tape measure that you got for $1 or 50 cents at a garage sale. Hook that up to your radio. Again, you don't have to have an expensive radio to do this or anything either. And there are a lot of different techniques that you can do. I never had any expensive equipment, but I was able to get by just fine and go find transmitter beacons, which is pretty fun. It's also the same thing that same sort of stuff involved when they're looking for people who've been trapped in an avalanche. We have avalanche beacons on them, and the search and rescue are searching for them in the snow. A lot of ham radio operators are also volunteer search and rescue, and help out with stuff like that, in addition to the communications between search and rescue and other agencies and things. With ham radio, unlike CB radio, we get lots of different frequencies, and different bands, different frequency bands, of course, have different properties. You may have already learned about some of this with SDR. The really high frequency stuff like Wi-Fi and 5 gigahertz and things are great in kind of crowded areas for getting through walls of an office and things like that, but they don't go very far. We've got really low frequency signals. Those don't go through anything really. In fact, they bounce, and that's one of the properties that makes them great for going really far. They bounce off of things like the ionosphere, can bounce off satellites. People will bounce them off the moon, and believe it or not, even passenger planes flying over between a couple cities. There are a lot of airplane tracking things now, so some people in a couple different cities, just for the hell of it, just to see if they can look at a flight path and wait for the right moment, and then send a signal and have a little 3 or 5 minute conversation, bouncing the signal off of a plane going overhead between them. Sorry, wrong direction. You don't have to bounce things. There are a lot of satellites as well up there. You can both bounce the signals off of these sometimes, or you can use them as relays and repeaters. Some of them are just sitting there broadcasting information. A lot of you in the SDR group might have already tuned into some of these, so there might be scientific satellites or GPS or anything like that, and they're just sending helpful little bits of data down to the Earth. The Mir space station generally has an amateur radio transceiver on there, and a few other things as well that are fun to pick up, and even try to transmit and have a conversation with some astronauts on board there. Repeaters are great. A lot of times the radios that we use are not the low frequency ones if we just want to go kind of a shorter distance, but they don't go through hills or mountains very well. That's where repeaters come in. You can put one of those on top of the hill, and they rebroadcast your signal out to a much greater distance, because it's kind of line of sight. So the house on the left can't see the house on the right. Stuff over to the right that it also can't see, but it can send its little signal up to the repeater. The repeater can rebroadcast that out not only to a greater area that can be reached just by line of sight, but also at greater power usually. People link these up through the internet as well. A couple projects like Echolink and IRLP will link together repeaters. So there's one in Sydney, in Paddington. If I pull out my radio at the moment, I can transmit to that repeater, press a couple different pads on my dial, on my a couple different dial tones on my keypad on my radio. It'll connect up to another repeater around the other side of the world. And I can talk to amateur radio operators back home and things like that. Repeaters can also be linked via radio, by the way. It's not always got to be through the internet. Linking them through radio is good when it comes to emergency planning and things like that. I'm from a place that is a little bit more of a harsh environment than a lot of people are used to, and natural disasters and accidents and things can happen. So having a wide range of repeaters linked through a couple different means as fallback methods is kind of a cool thing. And of course, as you know, another part of the hobby, all these, by the way, are kind of can be independent hobbies on their own, but also inclusive within amateur radio. There's a lot of bleed over, like I said. So software-defined radio, RTL, SDR, Hack RF1, USRP, all kinds of things, right? This is where I think that we kind of have kept the bit of the hobby and radio in general in modern times. We get new electronics and we go digital and things like this. We get great pieces of software like GNU Radio, so there's a lot more programming involved with radio these days as well sometimes. Should mention also quickly that commercial stuff out there these days, a large portion of it has all stemmed from amateur experimentation first, and then people have commercialized it in a lot of cases. And in some cases, it goes the other way as well. Amateur radio enthusiasts will adopt commercial technologies as well. And this is the case with some digital modes. We have other things as well with location beacons. I touched on that a little bit earlier before, but we have things like APRS, tracking cars and bikes and who knows what, just for fun, and planes as well. So I'm sure that one of the things that you've done by now in your SDR group there is to track some planes. This is normally the part where I would ask if anybody's been to Defcon, and if so, did you bring your mobile phone, and did you have it turned on and connected to the internet and things like that? Because of course, as most of you know, that's also a radio. Probably see things like the Wi-Fi Pineapple everywhere because they have a booth there and they sell it, and there are script kiddies running around everywhere. Lots of pineapples, and also 3G rogue hotspots and things like that. So what do? You want to go to DEF CON. It's a massive venue with a lot of different talks. You've got some friends that you want to try and meet up with for drinks and the secret parties and things like that. You don't want to have the radio turned on your phone. You can use something like these, right? Most of you will be familiar with these little walkie-talkies. These are UHF CB radios. They don't require a license or anything like that. I think that the law actually might read that you just are granted a license by being a citizen. It's citizens band. So there are some regulations and things like that. Not that people pay attention to them, but you're free to use these for the most part, as long as you don't modify them or anything like that. So you're at DEF CON. You use these to get a hold of your friends. That's all great, except for all the other people using these, talking trash on there maybe, or listening in and crashing your secret parties, or just messing with you or jamming your signals and things like that. So what do? You can get an amateur radio license, and then, oops, wrong picture. Oh well. And then you can talk on frequencies that these people can't, unless they also have amateur radio license, and generally they will be a little bit more well behaved and not do illegal things or naughty things. Now there are people still with scanners that will listen in on your conversations maybe, and still crash your secret parties, because this is the same thing basically as the CB radios, except on different frequencies, and the scanners will pick it all up. So we can take this a little bit to get a digital amateur radio. In Australia, the Foundation license currently doesn't have provisions for digital, unfortunately. I know, it's a pain. But there's some legislation changes being proposed. Actually, I think they were proposed back in April. And you can kind of go to the WIA, that's the Wireless Institute of Australia. You can go to their website and look at their news section and try and keep filled in for if they change the Foundation limitations for digital modes. If they do that, that means when you get your Foundation license, you can use one of these guys on the right. This is a DMR radio. It's just one of a few different digital voice technologies. And I should mention in the US and Australia and a number of other countries, you're not allowed to use encryption which is probably pretty outdated legislation at this point, because we're using radios every day in our pocket with these screens on them, everything, and we're using encrypted messengers and things like that. And so we can do encrypted stuff anyway. When you get an amateur radio license, chances are you're probably not doing illegal stuff. You're doing it for the love of the hobby. Tend to be well behaved and not do illegal stuff anyway. So why penalize people who are abiding by the law? Anyway, don't know. In Canada, you can use encryption. So, one of my goals would be to get as close to encryption as possible legally. The laws in the US and Australia and other countries will let you, depending on your license class. Australia might be one of the only ones where the bottom class can't use digital, but that might change, like I said. But they'll let you use open digital modes that are widely used. So DMR, C4FM, or Fusion. It's a proprietary one by Yaesu, but it's open, so you can use it. D-Star and other things, even packet radio, RTTY and PSK31 and Olivia and all kinds of other things. These are all digital encodings, not to be confused with encryption. Encodings, not encryption. So you can use them. And DMR has some neat features where you can kind of drill that down and you set your who you want to talk to. You set them on a certain channel and a special squelch tone, and it's digital as well. So anybody listening to it just kind of hears gobbledygook. So that's about as close as you can get, I think, to privacy legally with that sort of thing. Not to mention, there's just a lot of cool aspects about it. There's packet recovery with the digital audio and stuff as well. Quick warning before we finish this up. Show of hands, who recognizes this, by the way, just out of curiosity? Oops, sorry. Anyway, word of warning is, if you do illegal stuff, you can get hit pretty hard by the FCC if you're in the US, or the ACMA here in Australia, doing things like running illegal pirate radio stations and things like that. Read the regulations, abide by them. In some countries, you will get hit harder with fines and things, and maybe jail time if you have a license than if you don't. Again, it's a little bit strange, but maybe they do that, I'm guessing, because you should know better. And so, yeah, bad things can happen. That's pretty much it this time. In the future version of this talk, I would like to do a little bit of a demonstration with DMR and especially with SDR, going through GNU Radio and kind of decoding DMR, just to show that, yes, we got pretty good privacy, but then reward anyone who's listening to the talk with how you can decode that with GNU Radio and things like that. So I'll just minimize this real quick because I can't hear any of you, and it looks like we'll be taking questions via chat. And hopefully Pam will enter any questions from the group into the chat on behalf of whoever's asking. And if there are no questions, just go ahead and send me a message to let me know. And we'll hand it over to the antenna folks.